All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we are tackling a case that's, well, it's one of the most twisted and fascinating ones we've covered yet, I think.
Oh, yeah, I mean, this one's going to stay with you.
It is. It really is. So we're talking about Tasha Fields. You sent this over, 48 hours temptation.mp3. This woman was convicted of orchestrating her ex-husband's murder. And it's wild.
It really is. And it takes place across 2 states, multiple marriages. It's got it all deceit, manipulation.
Yeah, I mean, and at the center of it all is this question. Did Tasha manipulate everyone around her to get what she wanted? Or was she a victim herself?
Yeah, I mean, was she just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Like, how
Yeah.
much agency did she really have?
Right. Well, the podcast starts with this guy, Dwayne Barrentine. He's a single dad.
Mm-hmm.
He meets Tasha at his son's daycare, and like they hit it off immediately. His son even starts calling her mama.
Yeah, and that's like a big red flag right there.
Okay, what?
Well, it's classic love bombing.
You love bombing. What's that?
Basically showering someone with affection, like really intensely.
Mm.
But it's often a way to hide ulterior motives.
So you're saying like all this affection she showed Dwayne, that could have been a tactic, not even genuine.
Well, it's certainly possible. And it's a theme that runs throughout this whole story, this idea of Tasha creating a facade.
Oh, I see. So Dwayne, he starts to notice some things, little inconsistencies in Tasha's stories about her education, even about an inheritance from her grandfather, who she claimed was a federal judge.
And that's when he's like, wait a minute, something's not adding up here. This woman is not who she says she is.
Oh, right. And that's when he really starts digging into her past. Finds out about multiple marriages, one to a guy named Mitch Kemp.
The father of her daughter.
And Mitch, he disappeared years before. Shortly after Tasha married her third husband, Greg Morton.
So now we've got a missing ex-husband in the picture.
Yeah, and I mean, does that automatically make her look guilty? Or is it just a crazy coincidence?
Mitch's family, they never believed it was a coincidence. They always suspected Tasha had something to do with it.
Wow. But then things get even crazier. Because another ex-boyfriend of Tasha's, Keith Jones, he comes forward and tells the police that Tasha confessed to him that Greg had shot Mitch at her request.
I mean, that's a bombshell, right?
Huge.
But even Keith, he struggled to believe her stories.
So what do we make of that? If even the people closest to her couldn't figure out what was true and what wasn't.
What it highlights just how good she was at manipulating people, at weaving these elaborate webs of deception.
And then you've got Dwayne Wright. He finds messages on Tasha's MySpace page from Mitch's family. They're desperately searching for him.
And remember, at this point, Dwayne has already heard Keith's story.
Right, so it's like all these pieces start falling into place. He knows he has to do something, so he goes to the police.
And that's when this whole thing blows wide open.
Yeah, the police, they get Chief Lou Roberts and Detective Dave Wilson on the case. They start interviewing Dwayne and Keith, and their stories, they match up.
And that's key, right? When you have multiple people telling a similar story, it lends credibility to their claims.
So do the police start to think, okay, we're onto something here?
Oh, absolutely. They realize this is more than just a missing persons case. They bring Tasha in for questioning, and she denies knowing anything about Mitch's whereabouts.
But then over multiple interrogations, her story starts to change.
Classic manipulation tactic.
Trying to control the narrative.
Exactly. She's
Yeah.
trying to stay one step ahead of the investigators. But those inconsistencies, they're going to come back to haunt her.
So what happens next?
Well, it's about to get a whole lot more complicated.
Buckle up, everybody. We're just getting started with this case.
So we left off with Tasha's story changing during those police interrogations.
Yeah, and it just keeps getting wilder from there. So she finally tells the police that Greg killed Mitch out of jealousy.
Right. And not only that, she leads them straight to Greg's former farm in Missouri. And you know what they find there.
Let me guess, Mitch's body.
Exactly. Mitch's body with 6 bullet wounds.
Oh, wow. So that's game over, right? They've got their killer.
Well, not so fast. Greg is arrested.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he confesses to killing Mitch.
Okay.
He claims that Tasha manipulated him into doing it.
Wait, so he's saying she put him up to it, like she was the mastermind behind the whole thing.
Exactly.
That's a bold move, admitting to murder but blaming someone else.
It's a risky strategy for sure. I mean, on one hand, he's accepting responsibility, but on the other hand, he's trying to shift the blame.
And what about Tasha?
Well, she's arrested 3.5 months later, charged with first-degree murder, and she denies any involvement whatsoever.
So now it's a he said, she said situation.
Basically, it all comes down to who the jury believes.
You mentioned in your notes that this case really hinged on witness testimony.
Yeah, because there wasn't a lot of physical evidence. No
Yeah.
DNA, no murder weapon, so it became a battle of narratives.
Okay, so walk me through the trial. What were the key moments?
Well, the prosecution, they presented Greg as this pawn in Tasha's game.
Yeah.
They argued she wanted Mitch out of the picture, so she could have sole custody of their daughter.
And Greg, he went along with that.
He testified that she had manipulated him, said she made up this whole story about being raped by Mitch to provoke him into killing him.
Wow, that's intense. But was there any proof of that assault?
No, there wasn't any police report or anything, which the defense obviously used to their advantage. They said Greg's testimony couldn't be trusted, especially because he had taken a plea deal.
Hold on, what's a plea deal?
It means he agreed to plead guilty to a lesser charge in exchange for a reduced sentence.
Oh, so he was getting something out of it. So the defense is saying he had a motive to lie.
Exactly. They argued that Greg was the controlling one, that Tasha was actually afraid of him.
So they're painting two completely different pictures of her.
Yeah, on one side, you've got this manipulative mastermind, and on the other, you've got this terrified victim.
Did anyone else's testimony stand out?
Oh, yeah, Keith Jones, the ex-boyfriend who claimed Tasha had confessed to him.
Right.
He told the jury that she admitted to luring Mitch to the farm. Yeah, that word really stuck with the jury. It suggested premeditation, like she had planned this whole thing out.
But Tasha, she denied saying that, right?
Yeah, she said Keith must have misheard. Or maybe he heard it from Greg.
Because they were friends.
Exactly.
It's like a game of telephone. The story gets twisted as it gets passed along.
Right, and it all comes down to who you believe.
So after all that, what did the jury decide?
They deliberated for 8 hours.
8 hours.
Yeah, can you imagine? Trying to sort through all those conflicting stories. But in the end, they found Tasha guilty of first-degree murder. Sentenced her to life in prison.
Wow, and Greg.
He got 19 years for second-degree murder.
So they believed him over her. But I still don't get it. If she really did all this just for custody of her daughter, wouldn't there have been an easier way?
That's a question a lot of people had. It just didn't seem like that was her only motivation.
So what else could it have been? What could have driven her to do something like this?
That's the big question, isn't it?
And maybe it's one that we can try to unpack a little more. You know, I was thinking about that too, about the custody thing. It doesn't feel like the whole story. Like maybe there was something else going on. I kept going back to that idea of control, like how Tasha always had to be the one calling the shots in her relationships with everyone.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely comes through in the podcast. This need to be in control. And maybe that was a bigger motivator for her than even the custody issue.
It's like she was always putting on a show, creating this perfect image of herself. But it was all fake.
Right, and think about it. All those lies, those manipulations, they were all about control. Controlling how people saw her, controlling the situation.
It worked for a while, though, didn't it?
Yeah, she managed to fool a lot of people. But eventually, the truth always comes out.
And in this case, it all came crashing down at the trial, when all those inconsistencies in her story, they just couldn't be ignored anymore.
It's like a house of cards. One little breeze and the whole thing collapses.
It's a sad story all around. It reminds you that you can't always judge a book by its cover.
Absolutely. You never really know what's going on behind closed doors, what someone might be capable of.
Well, this has been a lot to take in.
It really has. This is one of those cases that just gets under your skin, and it makes you think.
About what?
About the justice system.
Yeah.
About how we decide who's guilty and who's innocent. When you have all these conflicting stories, how can you ever be sure you're getting the whole truth?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's what makes true crime so compelling.
It forces us to confront these really difficult questions.
About human nature,
About
morality, about good and evil.
Exactly. And even though it can be unsettling, I think it's important to keep asking those questions.
To keep learning. To keep trying to understand.
And this case has sparked your interest in this sort of thing, in the psychology of manipulation. I encourage you to go out there and do some more research. There are so many fascinating cases out there.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be covering more of them in future deep dives, so be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss an episode. But for now, we're going to leave you with that thought. Keep those wheels turning, folks, and we'll see you next time.